One second. Okay. Well, today we're joined by Kady McFadden from the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club. She's the deputy director there. And we're really excited to have Kady talk to us today about a fair tax proposal and how this proposal affects the environment and our communities. So Kady is steeped in the Illinois political scene. She's very astute when it comes to who the stakeholders are and how these kinds of policies also affect environmental policies. So whenever I'm on events like this, I like to hear the presenters kind of describe themselves in their own words. I find that to be a little bit more engaging and you learn a bit more. So with that, I'd like to pass it to Kady to introduce herself and tell us a bit more about the fair tax proposal.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Excited to be here and excited to be talking about this topic. So for those of you who I don't know, my name is Kady McFadden. I am the Deputy Director of the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club. And one of the big things that I do in that role is I lead the Sierra Club's political program. So we make endorsements up and down the ballot here in Illinois, from Congress and President to a lot of General Assembly races, but even City Council and local forest preserve districts. So kind of depending on where we think it's really important for us to engage. And so I help to manage that work for us. And it's a really important piece of the puzzle for our community, for our environmental community. Obviously, the people who get elected to write and vote on our environmental laws, whether it's local, state, or federal level, who is in those positions matters a whole lot. And so if you have participated in some of our political work, thank you. If this is the first time you're starting to think about those connections and draw those connections, welcome. And we hope that 2020, for lots of reasons, will be an important election year for you to get involved. But today specifically, we're looking to talk about the fair tax ballot referendum, which will be on your Illinois ballot this fall. And I want to start by just setting the stage and asking, why would an environmental organization, yes, with a long history of trying to influence Illinois policy, now decide to join a growing coalition of folks who have been working really for quite some time to change our broken tax system? And just to start out, that's really because we've seen the inherent connection between the state's broken revenue system and its ability to protect our environment. And this connection has never been more important now when the Trump administration is letting down Illinois and other states in what used to be a partnership between the federal government and the state and local governments in protecting the environment and communities that we care about. And then especially, I just want to take a note for this moment in time, because of the coronavirus, because of the environmental challenges that we are facing, this moment in time has only underscored the importance of listening to science, and so we can't do that properly right now. If you guys can move to the next slide, just a little bit about how we'll organize our time together. I'm going to start actually with the environmental case for the fair tax, and then actually dive more into what the fair tax is itself, because I'm guessing you guys all came here to kind of hear about part number one. And then, because I am an organizer at heart, I'm going to tell you how you can get involved, and then we'll have some questions. So just a little bit about our agenda today. And you can go to the next slide. Great. So protecting the environment has long been a priority for state government. We don't always think about this, but it's actually in the Illinois Constitution. It was written in the early 70s, and we're one of the few states that guarantees the right to a healthy environment. Maybe you were part of this study to get this in the Constitution, but it is a constitutional mandate, and it makes it the responsibility of state government, but also of individuals to help create a healthy environment. And you can move on. So Illinois started, once we kind of have this mandate in the Constitution, we really started off pretty ambitiously and aggressively. So we were a cutting edge environmental protection state for a long time. We just had the 50th anniversary of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. Really through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, We had this very professional workforce. We were growing our capacity to monitor our environment and enforce those who were breaking the law. But Illinois has had budget problems due to our failure to have enough revenue. And that has really eroded this legacy of environmental protection when we've truly actually needed it the most. So you can see in this chart that 2003 was really an important year. So Sierra Club and allies, maybe some of you on this call, worked hard to increase fees on pollution in order to have more resources and supplement what IEPA was able to do. So we saw EPA falling behind, they needed more resources, yet we're sort of stuck with this flat income tax, and agencies were really beginning to show signs of strain. So we thought that increased fees would both incentivize decreasing pollution, but also add to the agency's ability to really fulfill its mission. But fees were increased in the years to follow, but all the tax dollars that were originally there for IEPA went away when they were needed for other priorities within the state, again, when our revenue failed to keep up with overall budget needs. So a little bit about this chart. The black is actual dollars. The gray is adjusted for inflation. So you can see, we have much less resources to do even more work. Great. This has also been reflected in the staffing. So half of the workforce, you can see that we have half of the workforce in 2018 as IEPA had in 2003. So a reminder, this is scientists, engineers, attorneys, resource professionals who are working hard to protect our air, land, and water. They're all doing that with half of what they had. So this is all a reminder, this is all at the same time that the federal government is rolling back not only the dollars that they're giving to state agencies, but they're also rolling back environmental safeguards that we've historically counted on themselves, obviously, particularly since 2016. But it just really underscores this theme of having to do more with less. And then on the next slide, you'll see another graph that really helps illustrate what this has meant in terms of work for our state. So this is what those at the Bureau of Air at IEPA are able to do in terms of checking and monitoring sources of pollution. So, we're right now in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. We're keenly aware of the need to have as healthy of air as possible. Unfortunately, though, we're seeing communities dealing with new sources of pollution, dirtier and even dirtier air during this pandemic. So with agencies that we count on to make sure polluters are obeying the law and inspecting our air, those who are, who were monitoring thousands of polluters a decade ago, they're now just doing a few hundred due to their lack of budget to do so. And again, this is another place where the Trump administration is making enforcement basically optional at the federal level because of the pandemic. So rolling back regulations at a time of need. So again, this is only making it more important that our resources are there at the state level. And this is a moment to underscore this is exactly the kind of thing that IEC and our partners fight for, right? Is to be able to have these state protections. So I'm probably telling you things that you already know. But next slide. A little bit about what this means when it comes to clean water. So what about the Bureau of Water? For rivers, lakes, and streams that are polluted in Illinois, you probably know that the Clean Water Act guarantees that a state will do a cleanup plan that fixes those problems to ensure that they are safe. So you can see in both of these charts, the orange slice of the pie. So on the left, we have for rivers and streams, and for the right, this is for our lakes and ponds. These are the dirty waters that are waiting for IEPA to do those cleanup plans. So this is frankly terrifying if you've never seen these charts before. These are communities across the state that do not meet federal or state standards for clean water. They're not able to fulfill the assignment that they were given by the federal government to create cleanup plans at the state level. So again, woefully and like under-resourced and able to do the jobs that we're being asked to do. If you take a look at the next slide, unfortunately, the situation is not any better at the agency that we count on to protect our great outdoors, our wildlife, recreational opportunities. So our state parks, which used to be a great asset for our state during the time when the state was actually investing in them, we're now struggling to even keep them open. We're losing progress on habitat restoration projects. Communities that count on these parks also suffer when the parks are unable to sustain the amount of visitors they have. So the situation at DNR is pretty similar to that at IEPA, where DNR has also lost just about half of its staff. And again, this is a place where Illinois used to be a model, not only in regulating pollution, but also had scientists looking at our water, looking at our wildlife to monitor and be proactive. We could see problems before they emerged, we could take action. And now we barely have a skeleton crew of these professionals there today. And then we can take a look at the next slide. So we know that this is really important to protect our environment. You've seen sort of data on the air and water work that isn't being done at these agencies, but it's also really important to address income inequality. There's a really important intersection here with the environment. So we've seen clearly how Black and brown communities and disadvantaged parts of our state are dealing with more air and water pollution. They're dealing with more toxic waste sites than in other parts of the state. There are many reasons for this. Structural racism definitely has a part to play here, but so does income inequality. If residents are having to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, they're just simply less able to defend themselves against threats to the environment that perhaps residents in wealthier communities are able to. It's an example of like attending public hearings, being able to have time to put in public comments. So the effort to address income inequality is an important part of stopping environmental racism. We need everyone to be able to participate in democracy to ensure that communities and the places that we care about are protected. So this that's sort of outlined as the environmental case. We'll move on and with the next slide, sort of transition to talking a little bit more about, okay, so what is the fair tax? So Vote Yes for Fair Tax is a coalition, it's a ballot committee made up of a number of organizations that are across the state that are fighting for this fair tax. So they're doing educational events like this one, but they're advocates, community groups, educators, employers, parents, faith leaders, to actually fight for this. So this presentation, the Sierra Club is officially an endorser and part of the Vote Yes for Fair Tax. So the work that we're doing on the fair tax is an in-kind to this ballot committee. But if you take a look at the next slide, you'll see, again, just this is the big picture, right? Our current tax system in Illinois is just fundamentally unfair. It allows millionaires and billionaires to avoid paying their fair share of taxes and pushing the tax burden onto middle and lower income families. And it also underfunds critical services that we all depend on. So this is a big question that we get. If you click to the next, if we pass the fair tax, what this does is it tries to set things right here in Illinois to help working families. The nuts and bolts, anyone who makes $250,000 or less will get a tax cut or pay no more than they do right now. So that's 97% of the state will either pay the same or less taxes. I'm just gonna pause for effect there to make sure that you heard that statement. So truly, those who are impacted with higher taxes would only be the top 3% of the state. The fair tax also raises $3 billion that can be used to fund so many of the services that we just talked about. All right, we can move on to the next slide that asks what's wrong with our current tax system. So you can click forward. In 1970, Illinois changed its constitution to require that all income taxpayers pay the same tax rate regardless of the family's income and ability to pay. And so as a result, low and middle income families pay the same tax rate as millionaires and billionaires. And because of this requirement, Illinois cannot modernize its tax system so that higher incomes pay higher rates and lower incomes pay lower rates. And we are only one of 4 states that currently does this. Obviously, you know, the federal government has a graduated income tax system. So we are very unique in the fact that we have this system. We can go to the next slide. So our current system is very unfair. It's very inadequate. It's unfair because millionaires and billionaires pay less in taxes as a share of their income than middle and lower income families. And it's inadequate because it really underfunds critical services, which then pushes up property taxes and forces cuts to things like schools, public services, and jobs, especially where they're needed most. And you can see this illustrated on the next slide, where we have a graph that just shows how much Illinois families pay in all state and local taxes together as a percentage of their income. So think income, property, and sales taxes all put together. And then this is a percentage breakdown. So on the left side of the bar, showing the percentage share of income for the lowest 20% of earners. On the right-hand side, the bar is showing the percentage share of income for the wealthiest 1% of earners. So as you can see, this is unfairly balanced. The wealthy pay much less proportionally in their taxes as a share of their income as working families. And so that's why we call it the fair tax, and that's what the fair tax will help to fix. Illinois has the 8th most regressive tax system in the nation. And that's because of what you're seeing in this chart. So we can go to the next slide. So basically what happens as a result of this? Well, our current tax system fails to properly fund things like public education, harming our student and educators, pushing property taxes up. Traditionally, only about 1/4 of education funding here in Illinois comes from our state government. This is incredibly low, as the national average is nearly double that. And then when the state doesn't adequately support schools, local governments are forced to make up that difference. That puts pressure on them to turn to their primary tool, which is property taxes. And then if we take a look at the next slide, you all know this, but we absolutely cannot afford more cuts to social services. You can see some things that we have suffered under the past administration. Many mental health treatment facilities have been forced to close, healthcare providers. So while we sort of went into detail of, you know, the environmental ramifications of the lack of progressive income tax structure and what that's done for our environmental agencies, this is something that's shared really across the public services of the state. We've lost 7,500 higher education jobs, 40,000 low-income children have not been able to get childcare, so we're already experiencing deep cuts, and we simply can't experience more. So you can go to the next slide to talk a little bit more about what exactly is the fair tax. So again, to put it simply, the fair tax means lower income earners pay a lower tax rate and higher income earners pay a higher tax rate. This is, again, fundamentally fair because it ensures the wealthy pay their share and it lifts the burden off of middle and working class families. And then again, I spoke about this earlier, but the majority of states actually already have this in place. So Illinois is really the oddball here. The majority of states already have a fair tax system in place. That includes a majority of neighboring states. The federal government uses a fair tax system. So Illinois, as I mentioned, is only one of 4 states that mandates a flat tax in our state constitution. So we are not the norm here. And you can go into the next slide. What will the fair tax mean for us? Again, the fair tax is ultimately striving for tax fairness of the middle class. I emphasized it before, but 97%, the vast majority, will see no income tax increase. In fact, the majority of the middle and low income families will receive a tax cut. Only those making $250,000 a year will pay more than they do right now. And we can see that further illustrated in the next slide. So hopefully you can read this okay. Some people really like to dig into this. These are the marginal rates that will go into effect if the fair tax passes. So you'll see that 4.95% that applies to $250,000 income earners or less. You can see that, you know, how we're able to say that this is only affecting those above 250,000. You can see that right here. So the rates are higher for those above that, and they're either the same or lower for this as well. So as you can see, you know, those making over $250,000 a year will see a tax increase. Next slide. So the fair tax reform also includes additional tax cuts for our family. So sometimes this is news to people. It does expand the property tax credit from 5% to 6%, and it implements a child tax credit of $100 per child. And then we can take a look at the next slide. So how much will the fair tax bring into our state for all the struggling problems? The estimated answer to that is an additional $3 billion in revenue. So this will help ensure that we can really invest in our shared priorities: education, healthcare, environment, infrastructure, a number of the things that we talked about. And yes, that's $3 billion per year. So lastly, how do we pass the fair tax? How do we get engaged? What do we do next? I'm so very glad that you asked. So there's a number of things. First and foremost, so the Sierra Club has recently published an op-ed a couple weeks ago expressing sort of our environmental case for joining this. We now are trying to gather as many environmental voters to sign up and say that they will vote for the fair tax. So right now, I will put in the chat a link to our pledge to say that yes, you're in, you're gonna vote for the fair tax, you're gonna be an environmental voter for the fair tax. Our goal is to get 10,000 environmental voters, so please sign that pledge, share that pledge, and then if you can go to the next bullet. Also really excited to ask you to get your organization to sign on to join the Vote Yes for Fair Tax Coalition. Illinois Environmental Council is a beautiful coalition of a number of environmental organizations doing really great work, and we need more organizations to jump on and say, yes, these things are connected. We can't do our job to protect the environment here in Illinois without fixing our state's broken revenue problems, and signing on to help and educate your members about why it's important to vote yes for the fair tax, especially as an environmental voter. And I have a couple other things here. Tell your friends and neighbors. I've been doing this recently. It's especially important. You know, people know a lot about who's running for president in this election, and perhaps don't know that this is going to be on their ballot or don't know anything about it. There is going to be a lot of money spent truly on both sides of this debate, but we know from research that voters listen most to people that they trust, and likely that's all of you all. You are informed people who follow politics and know about environmental issues, and you're in a lot of people's lives, and you have the opportunity to influence them, especially when there's a lot of ads on TV, a lot of Facebook ads, and they don't really know who to trust. Tax issues especially are really complicated. We're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of people are feeling that very financially. And so anything around a tax, people may feel prone to just voting no on. We also know that people tend to vote no on ballot amendments or ballot amendments anyway. So this is not going to be an easy lift to pass this in November. I hope I've stressed to you the importance of just how critical this is, not only for the environment, but really for our state. And so if you're able to talk to your friends and neighbors and really make the case to them personally, especially leading up to the election, that's really gonna matter a lot when there's a lot of noise and misinformation that's being spread about what this truly does. And then, yes, you can use, I know we're not seeing our friends and neighbors perhaps as much as we normally would be, so using social media to also be a way to connect with other Illinois voters that you know. Again, there's going to just be a lot of noise around this, and people are, you know, going to listen to people that they trust, and I tend to think that you all are very trustworthy. And then what else do I have on here? Write a letter to the editor. Depending on where in the state you live, perhaps folks are not hearing about this. So if you're able to, in your local paper, maybe in a newsletter of another organization that you're a part of, write a letter to the editor actually breaking this down. And if you need resources for that, I'm happy to help provide those. And then I think I have host some sort of events like this. So we also think that talking to people directly through even, you know, small events where you're able to kind of break down what the fair tax actually is and answer questions, that is a really effective way to spread the word. And I think, oh yeah, I have one more slide. If your organization does want to sign up and join Vote Yes for Fair Tax, which I'm hoping will be something that comes out of this presentation, you can sign up as an endorser here at this link. You can follow Vote Yes for Fair Tax on social media. They have some great videos and different things debunking myths that you may hear. And then if you go to Vote Yes or yesforfairtax.org, that also has additional materials and resources. That will be great. So I am going to let's stay on this slide because I have one more that we'll maybe use at the end, but I'm happy to answer some questions now.
Thank you, Kady. So we have a couple questions in the chat. Just to remind folks that if you'd like to ask a question, you can put it in the chat, or if you'd like to ask via video yourself, you can click participants in the bottom menu and then click raise hand, and I will unmute you once we get to your question. And then for those on the phone, if you'd like to raise your hand, please hit *9, and I'll also be able to unmute you to ask your question. So to get to the questions that have been adding up in the chat here, we have a couple from Albert Ettinger, who first asked, do you have the actual language of the amendment, and does that language speak to the 250,000 number?
Great question. So this does not make it any, like, one of the talking points that you hear from the opposition, which is probably good to just discuss outright, is that they're calling this like a blank check to Springfield, which is a very good talking point. This does not make it any harder or easier to change tax rates. So the rates, the 250,000, that was passed by the General Assembly, as is our protocol, in the same way that they could decide to change the flat rate at any time that they're meeting, and have in the past. So they were the ones to approve the charts that I put up. So that will be what it is if the fair tax goes forward. And if the fair tax does not win, it will be upon the General Assembly to decide whether or not they keep the flat rate that we're currently at, or increase it, which frankly, they may have to if the fair tax does not go forward and actually increase taxes on everyone. So if that makes sense, it doesn't change the authority of sort of like, you know, what happens. It doesn't give legislators any more or less power to change tax rates than they always have. It gives lawmakers the flexibility to change tax rates based on income, which is what they don't have right now.
Thanks, Kady. And I think that's related to, Albert had kind of a second part to that question, which was, are the percentages themselves written into the Constitution, or is it based on income?
No, it is giving the legislature authority
Yeah.
to set them based on income levels rather than just flat to everyone.
Got it, thanks. Okay, moving on to the next question here, which is from Sarah Scott. Sarah asks, will it be written down, assigned to where the extra money can be spent? And how can we make sure the money will go to pro-environment, education, social services, et cetera, the things we want it to go to as opposed to the things we maybe don't want it to.
Great question. Thank you, Sarah, for asking it. So the fair tax revenue is not earmarked for anything. So there's no guarantee that the funds will go, to the environmental places we need it to. But that being said, first off, it's important to note that the governor ran on a platform of rebuilding EPA, IEPA, and DNR. And so I think, once there actually is revenue, that's sort of encouraging to know that it's something that he has made a priority to get those back up and running. Second, it gives us as advocates, us as the Illinois Environmental Council community, the Sierra Club community, we have been able to do some really great things when we go down to Springfield together. And so, and when we fight for our priorities, but we've really just had limited, if no ability to fight for any budget priorities because of this revenue problem. So the idea here is if there is additional revenue that we can even, right now there's not even really money for us to fight for or over. So the idea is that, yes, we're going to continue to be advocates. We're going to have to continue to use our muscle, build our grassroots power, have amazing lobbyists down in Springfield. But that's what we're good at. We can do those things. And this just gives us the opportunity to even have those funds to fight for.
The work never ends. Thanks, Kady.
The work goes on.
And then next question here is from Julius Zavala, who asks, are there efforts to close any loopholes that would allow wealthy individuals to claim residency elsewhere in an attempt to avoid the higher tax?
Great question. I don't know of any that are part of this. However, I will say that, like I mentioned, we're not unique. We're one of 4 states that has, or we are unique. We're one of 4 states that has a flat tax. And so I suppose there's 3 other states they could flee to. I don't happen to know those off the top of my head, but a number of our neighboring states have graduated income taxes. Like I said, the federal government has graduated income tax. So we're really very unique in that we don't have this already.
And then Kathy Hayes asks, personally, I agree with taxing retirement funds, but there are others that don't. Please discuss the effect of the fair tax on retirement funds.
Thank you, Kathy. This is a big thing that we're hearing a lot about. I think the opposition is sort of fueling this point. This actually the state does not tax retirement funds, and it will not tax retirement funds under this, or retirement income.
Great. And then the last one we have in the chat here. So I will prompt folks to add any others they have or raise their hand, again, by clicking on participants and clicking raise hand or hitting *9. But Trudy Gibbs asks, tell everyone about the website to check the effect, their action, I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong, to check the effect it will have on their taxes that Governor Pritzker required to set up.
Thank you. Yes, great point. I just put it in the chat. The Office of the Governor has this great fair tax calculator where you can put in your income, number of dependents, things like that, and actually it will calculate your new taxes if the fair tax went into effect. So if this is something that you're worried about, or you think people that you're talking to may be worried about the personal effect here, this is a really great tool to help get some clarity.
Great, thanks very much, Kady. So I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or hands raised. I'll give folks just another minute here to drop that in. And while giving you a chance to do that, I will emphasize the importance of using the links that Kady is sharing here on the screen. So I would, knowing how much IEC relies on these types of actions to do the work that we do, I can say that it definitely works. It is always helpful to have huge lists of people who've made it clear that they care about a thing when you're going to talk to a legislator or a decision maker about anything. So enormously important. I know sometimes it's It doesn't feel that way when you're just putting your name into a form and clicking a button. Let me tell you that the effect is huge, and it makes the jobs of lobbyists and people having those conversations a lot easier and makes them more effective. So I know that I will sign up as an endorser right now. I hope everyone else will join me in doing so.
And if you actually can go to the next slide, there's a couple final questions for folks.
Oh, secret slides. This is the first time we've had secret slides.
Would love for folks, if you are feeling moved about the environmental case for the fair tax, to just do a little bit of brainstorm about what you can commit to doing to help pass the fair tax. Like I mentioned, this is not going to be an easy lift, and we are going to need people all across the state and all corners of different fields to be helping. And so if you are moved by this or moved by any of these questions and want to share the answers that you have to any of these questions in the chat, I'd love to hear from folks kind of what they're motivated to do around this and what they think they could do as a next step. I know this is a lunch and learn, you're supposed to be learning, but if you know me, you know I was going to ask you to do something. So here are some questions about how you can take some next steps. And also if there's anything that you need in order to, become an advocate or spread the word, throw that in the chat as well so we can help get you what you need.
Okay, folks, the chat is open. There's also the, if you do want to raise your hand and make a comment, please click participants in the bottom menu and then click the raise hand button, and that'll tell me to unmute you. Okay.
Oh, and thanks to those who have messaged me privately. Feel free to share with the world. But
yeah, that's great. Folks can do that using the chat function. You can message Kady.
And Trudy, I'm not sure if I understand your question. Do you mean how the votes will be counted? So it'll be on your ballot on election day. And then if folks, oh yeah, here, we have the right. Maybe what you're asking is, how do we win? So like I said, it's going to be on your ballot in November 2020 election. We need a yes vote of more than 50% of those voting in the election, or more than 60% of those that vote on the question. That is what's required for passage. And if folks are asking, I think we had 2 questions on specific wording. I don't have that handy, but I can definitely find that. I would probably direct you to go into yesforfairtax.org. I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but I bet that they have it on their resource page. And I see your point regarding taxes on all if the fair tax isn't approved is a good one. Due to COVID, our increased revenue has decreased and expenses have increased. We need to get the money from somewhere. Yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate reality that sort of is hard to talk about, but I mean, we do have a very broken tax system in the state, and we have a pretty serious revenue crisis. And so if it's not the fair tax, it may just be a higher flat tax, which also no one's going to like, and doesn't address the issues of fixing income inequality, which has a lot of benefits. It doesn't have that. And so yeah, it is, again, folks don't like talking about it, but you know, in order to do the work of state government, we need to fix this revenue problem.
Okay, well, I'll leave the chat open here for another minute. Again, if you'd like to raise your hand, feel free. But I definitely, for myself, I'd say I learned a lot today, Kady. In particular, I don't think I realized that Illinois was only one of 4 states that continues to use a regressive flat tax. That seems like it's about time to change that. So, yeah, as much as I think you made a point earlier that I just would like to emphasize the importance of talking to people you know about these things. Given how we've seen social media used recently, it's pretty concerning to see the ease with which bad information can get out there and spread quickly. So the more that people hear these things, these facts from trusted people, is just going to be more and more important. So, I mean, I'm definitely committed to talking to everyone in my life about this and making sure they know these things as well.
That's how we're going to win. Thank you.
That's right. Thanks for so much for being here, Kady, and getting the word out. We have one. Sarah Scott has one more question here. Can you talk more about the opposition arguments that opponents are using?
Sure. Yeah, this is good, especially if you are ready to go out and talk to people about this. You want to know, what are they going to come back with, and how do I counter that? The tax on retirement income is one that comes up, but Illinois is just one of a dozen states that doesn't collect income tax on 401ks or IRA, pension, Social Security, and the fair tax is not going to change that. So that's just not true. The other one is the fair tax being a blank check for future tax increases. As I mentioned, that also is not true. It just changes how we tax people, but the rates themselves will have to be voted on by our General Assembly, just as they could vote on them any year. So it doesn't necessarily change that. Something is that kind of was alluded to in the chat, that the wealthiest individuals are going to find a way to avoid this. They're going to leave the state. The reality on that one is there actually is no research to back this claim up. So research shows there's no correlation between a state's tax rates and a likelihood of a high income family to leave the state. Middle and lower income Illinoisans actually have been fleeing the state for years after previous administrations have left our education system decimated. So fair tax will actually be a much needed revenue to get our state back on track and keeping those families in Illinois. Yeah, I think those are some of the main ones.
Very helpful, thanks. Okay, everyone, last call here for anything you'd like to add to the chat, or if you'd like to make a comment. Okay, well, seeing none, I'd like to just thank you again, Kady, for being here today. And just as a quick kind of closing note, again, we're recording all of these events, so today's session will be recorded and uploaded to IEC's YouTube, and we'll also have it stored on an archive on our website, which you can get to through the main menu. Please feel free to share it far and wide. We also will be having more of these events. So the next one is, sorry, I had this pulled up and I lost it. Just 1 second. The next one is coming up in a couple weeks. There it is. Okay, I'm sorry about that. The next one is on Wednesday, July 29th. We'll be co-hosting an event with the Prairie Rivers Network, which is an IEC affiliate located in Champaign, Illinois, to discuss coal in Illinois, and specifically our community's response to it and how we can clean up our state after coal has left quite a mess. So please feel free to register to that event. It's on IEC's website. We'll send out an email about it. And again, just to thank Kady and everyone else who joined us here today. We really appreciate your time and being with us. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording and end the event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.